Hi, welcome to the opening lecture for Introduction to Philosophy. This is a 100 level course. It's the normal fare for a required course in philosophy. I approach it as a historical course instead of coming at it and throwing a bunch of ideas at you and doing things that a lot of this, you're getting too much at one time. We have to learn how to walk before we can do anything else. And the key to that is just we have to reach back into time. The image I've chosen right now, this the at the Lyceum, you can see most of the ancient Greek, Roman philosophers that we will speak of in the first parts of this course. But we need to know, what is all this philosophy business about? Well, it has its roots in ancient Greece. Western philosophy begins over here, is what we traditionally call the home of Western philosophy. Although, as we'll find out, uh, it, most of it occurs outside of the Greek main areas, over here in what would be Troy and the Asia Minor coast. A lot of this is simply because of a geographic standing in the areas. Uh, the date that we use for the beginning of Western civilization and Western philosophy, for that matter, is around 700 BCE. The reason is Western civilization separates itself from the ancient world of Persia, Egypt, the Fertile Crescent. And some of these primary reasons are simply a change in religion, change in viewpoints, uh, the decline of the Persian Empire on the coast of Asia Minor, the decline of the Hittites, the decline of the Assyrian empires. All of these things are very important to what is going to become our Western Civs philosophy. Now, the first thing we need to remember is that, what is this philosophy? Well, let's look at the word. Okay, we need to know the etymology, or the origin of the word, and the way in which its meanings have changed throughout history. This is the study of etymology. This used to be a part of English that many kids, when I was younger, back in the 60s, back in the 70s and 80s, you wanted to know how the word began, which language the word came from. Uh, in philosophy, in the Greek here, as you can see, uh, which I will try to do throughout this, you have the word philosophy. It's a combination of two words. You have philosophy, which is love, and logos, which is word, or setting words in a rational or logical order. And then you have Sophia, which is the love of wisdom. So you have philo plus Sophie, and you get philosophy, or the love of wisdom. That is what a philosopher is by Greek definition. We have to understand this. Um, this definition is a definition we will apply in this class. That a philosopher is simply a lover of wisdom. And you can't get wisdom through knowledge. You have to have wisdom through the use of knowledge. And we'll get into that system later, too. The man in the left here is Diogenes of Sinope, and he's simply walking through Athens during the middle of the day with a lamp, asking if there's an honest man. More on Diogenes later in the course. But what happened before philosophy? Well, philosophy comes out of the Greek tradition of mythos. And mythos is this idea that there are other things that are controlling the nature of the universe. Things that we can't explain are simply explained either through naturalistic and animistic religions, or through the Greek religion, which was a series of gods in control of things. Um, This is something that is not just a Greek thing, or a Roman thing, or a Hittite thing, or an Egyptian thing, or a Hindu. This is common throughout, particularly in early polytheistic religions. Well, what is this mythos? Mythos places the world in a context of supernatural beginnings. This is a creation story for the Judeo-Christian creation story. It's God created the earth in 7 days and 7 nights. You could go to other nations. I'm particularly interested in creation stories of the Near East, which also involved a being creating something. Same thing with the Egyptian creation myths, and a lot of your African creation myths have these same a being forming the earth and creating it. Well, these are simple. These are things to do. Uh, they're explanatory stories, and they explain what's going on in the world. Why is this happening? And some of the things that are happening are as simple as the sun traveling across the sky. Your Viking myths, your Greek myths, the whole series of the sun's in a cart being driven across the sky, and then at night the moon is a boat being driven across the sky. The boat idea is very common in Egyptian mythology and Egyptian their mythos. So these are common things. These are not, meant to be taken as truth. Um, the other thing these do is this creates a moral compass or a direction for the Greeks. A lot of stories about the creation, particularly with certain religions and certain faiths, are meant to be moral plays. They're meant to explain something that should be done, how one should act in these cases. Um, Now, with the Greek myths, you have to look really deeply because Zeus, sometimes acting like Zeus would be a bad thing. Most of the time, the man is not a very good guy. He would have been a player, but that is how the god reacts. Um, all of this was meant to teach means of action, ways to act, or a morality. And everyone's like, well, how could you? They have all these gods. I don't understand the system, and that's fine. You don't have to completely understand the system. Just remember that this is a group of people, the ancient Greeks, and then later the Romans, who would just simply take this entire system and apply it to Rome, changing all of the names of the gods and goddesses, which of course you have to do if you're going to go stealing somebody's religion and just adding it to your own culture. But you can see that Mount Olympus in Greece was an easily scalable mountain. It's 2,000 meters high, and it was the home of the gods. But nobody ever went up there to check. Or if they did, they didn't tell us whether they saw the gods or not, because it wasn't that important to be where the gods were. Now, these mythologies would form the rules to establish an order in society. If you have read the Old Testament and the Bible, you can see that there's a description of how things should be done. I read a lot of Asian philosophy, in particular Confucius, which is a very filial society. A lot of what Confucius say, or Confucius, is to basically tell people the ways to act to their superiors and to their lessers, and that there's a system of things. This is the filial piety. This would be covered in an Asian philosophy class. Not so much in this course, but we will encounter this problem of filial piety. But you develop the society from your myths. The myths are designed to create an order to help maintain a society. The one thing that this does is it unites. There's a uniting factor in this. All Greeks are united under this faith of this religion, and it was a good thing. It's a form of following the ancestors, not ancestor worship as we would think of it, where you set up shrines and you worship, but by doing as the ancestors did, only in good matters, not in bad matters. We don't want to ever choose to do the bad things that our ancestors have done. We don't even like to talk about those as human beings. But it's not ancestor worship. And the idea is that it was good enough for them. And this is important because the average Greek, his day was pretty mundane. You have to worry, you're eking out an existence. The only thing you have around you is the hopes that the merchants are going to have enough food, are going to have the products. And you begin to generate some free time. And with free time, you get an idea to start looking at exactly what's going to happen next, and that's important. Now, again, I said this comes from a conservative viewpoint. This means in keeping with the status quo, to keep things as they are, to maintain the order of the universe, the order of the state, the order of the nation, you have to maintain the order that your ancestors did, your grandfather, your great grandfather, et al. It's not a political stance, okay? Please, we're going to have enormous chances to clear up some of these horrible misconceptions that you've been given. Because a conservative viewpoint is actually, in this state, you're looking at it as conserving the order that you have. It's okay to do that because that order had function. It's not a political position, okay? It's a way of maintaining the past and history of the nation. This is Rodin's The Thinker, and this is where the big change occurs, not in the statue itself. But someday, one person just sitting there, he saw something differently in ancient Greece, and it didn't have the mythos behind it. Instead, he looked at the world around him, and he saw that there were other things causing this to happen. He looks at the clouds, and he notices off to the left, off to the west, because the clouds move west to east, just like they do in North America and in the and in the northern hemisphere. The clouds are moving across, and he notices that at certain times, when the clouds are a certain color, that rains. Or when the clouds, these little telltale signs, these things that can be traced and show a causality of the universe. And he begins to question this, and he questions what's happening. One day he leaves a piece of raw chicken or something out, and the next day he comes back and it's been scavenged by some creature, and he has to figure out, well, why was this scavenged, and what is causing this? This leads to things like, why does the sun turn dark at certain times of the day, why and then become light again? Why does it look like the sun is eating the moon? This inquiry leads to examining the natural phenomenon is occurring because of another phenomenon. And it's simply, if you look into the sky during an eclipse, we will see the sun traversing across the moon, traversing across the sun. And when this occurs, it's going to blot out the light. Does it blot out the light everywhere? No, because you can see this exact same eclipse from somewhere else and it will give you a different view. So this is a natural phenomenon, a phenomenon that can be easily explained. Now, not in the ancient world, not as easy. And it would lead, these were the kind of things that when they occurred, the action of mythos, and you add priest class and people that are supposed to be reading these, and they come in and they start going, well, this is a sign of this, or it's a sign of this. Same thing with things falling from space. These are going to be seen differently. But you're going to try to get behind it. Why did it fall? Well, it's this. And these are just natural occurring phenomena. And you have to question these phenomena. When you start questioning the phenomenon, and these are physical acts, things that actually are occurring, you begin to see different things. You must remember that the word phenomenon, and it would be very important, it's an observable fact. It is something which we can observe. We can observe it raining. We can observe a lake drying up. We can observe what would happen if you leave a fish at the fish market out in the sun all day. It's going to go bad and it's going to stink. We know these things follow from each other. This is causality. We'll get into causality even deeper as we get more into the semester. But why was it Greece? Why did Greece do this? Why was Greece the place that Western civ and Western philosophy began? The West there were thoughts and ideas of other civs crisscrossing Athens and Sparta, the western coast of Asia Minor, the Greek colonies in Italy and along the coast of Spain and southern France, the information from the Egyptians and their mythology. Uh, but all of these ideas coalesced right in ancient Greece. So you have Assyrian, Persian, Dorian, Egyptian, Phoenician, Roman, Carthaginian. They all traded with the seafaring Greeks. Because in the nation of Greek, you're really never more than 150, 200 miles from the ocean, no matter where you are. They traded with them. And these ideas that they would hear from a guy from like from Egypt, or a fellow from Massila, or somebody from Troy, or somebody who's coming in from Cyprus or Tyre, and they would tell you these stories of what's occurring and how their religion works, or what they had seen here, or what they had saw here. These things will eventually be picked up. Well, why is that happening? And the reason it was Greece is a perfect crossroads. It's the very bottom half of Eastern Europe. It sticks right out into the eastern half of the Mediterranean, and it's a short jaunt by sailboat pretty much anywhere in the Mediterranean from Greece. Now, the primary reasons that Greece developed what we would be calling Western philosophy are very simple. Ancient Greece did not have a priest class. There's no priest class. There's not a group of people that are in charge saying, hey, you can't say that, that's against the gods. They didn't have that. Primarily because there's no overarching religious dogma or canon. This is important. Remember, their gods were more human than human, to quote a bad 80s song. But they were just as human, and they had the same foibles, they had the same religion, the same reasons for failing. Uh, there's an ability then, because of this, to question as the gods do, to question what the gods do. This comes up a couple of times in Republic by Plato, which we will cover eventually, and we're going to talk about Plato. And then you have the power of reason over mythos. And this is really, really important, because reason is I can sit down and look at something and say, this is what I believe. This is what I'm seeing. These are the things I know I can prove, because it happens every time. This happens. The sun every morning rises in the east and sets in the west. I know this because I see it every day. These are things. It's not a guy in a cart. You can have Thor driving a cart full of goats. You can have, the Mercury, anybody doing it. But these things do not make that much sense. And when you start applying reason to it, as in the sun simply being blocked out by the moon, and then you can prove it through the mathematics of the time, now you're on to something. There are two things that we need to remember, and these are very important definitions, and memorize these. Cosmogony. These are theories about the origins of the world. How was the world created? What do we know? And then there is the cosmology, our theories about the nature of the world. In ancient Greece, we're going to be more concerned about the cosmology of the nature of the world, why and how these things are done together, and what is occurring. These two theories are used in concert to create a wonderful understanding of the world around us, or around them, the ancient Greeks, instead of trusting a blind mythos, which is not bad. Okay, we're going to blind faith, and faith, we'll understand that a little deeper when we get to Soren Kierkegaard. But we must remember that is this, that that by observing the world around him, they can experience the world. It's these experiential actions that are important. So just remember, the two theories are used in concert to create a wonderful understanding of the world around us, instead of trusting blind mythos, which is not bad, we must remember, but by observing the world around them. This is where the whole of Western philosophy starts, is this idea that, well, the rivers all flow to the ocean. Well, how can you prove that? Well, the easiest way is to go to the beginning of every river in an ocean and start looking there. But what about rivers that end up in the desert? That's a different answer. But you're going to see that there's something common in this. water goes downhill and water seeps its own level. These are simple scientific facts, but 2,000, 3,000 years ago, this was major work. For the purpose of this class and the introduction to what philosophy is, we need to know what the ancient Greeks created. Okay, the photo is, of course, Socrates as he's being condemned to death. The man drank the poison and kept talking. When we discuss Socrates, we'll discuss more of how this guy has a wonderful ability to, much like your instructor, never shut up. I don't shut up either, and that's going to be good for you or bad for you, depending. But there's four main things that we need to concern ourselves for this portion of the course. And these are the things the Greeks were most interested in. The first was ontology, or the theory of being. What is this being, and, well, what are you? What am I doing? What is it all about? What am I here for? Who am I? How do I know I exist? How do I know I'm not a brain in a vat? Well, we'll get to the brain in a vat questions later. You have epistemology. This is the theory of knowledge. What do you know? How do we attain knowledge? Where is knowledge at? How can I acquire this knowledge? You have axiology, or the theory of value. Now, this is important. I kind of work a lot in this area, values and ethics. So this will create ethics, the moral philosophy, the theory of right behavior. One of the words that you're going to despise, which I too have large issues with, is the word ought, and what you ought to do, ought, and how this works. We'll cover that later, but right now it's what is moral philosophy? What is the action of right? And a lot of the ancient Greeks, particularly Plato and Aristotle, will discuss this aspect of doing the right thing. And then aesthetics, or the idea of beauty. Okay, this also comes out of this axiology, this theory of value. Aesthetics is really interesting because I do a lot of work with food. I don't believe that, like, you can take the simplest items in the world, flour, water, salt and sugar, and a little bit of yeast, and you can create bread. And from that, you can create different textures through different things. It's an aesthetic choice. You'll hear that. It's these ideas why certain foods are good, why foods aren't good, why people like certain types of artwork, why they don't like certain types of artwork. And then, of course, we have logic, which is the theory of correct inference. A lot of people will say that's not logical, you don't understand. Many people, they themselves, are poor critical thinkers and poor users of logic, and it takes a lot of time to learn how to do logic well. But it's important to know that through logic, you can actually pretty much find a good, close, definitive answer and work from there. The inquiry of philosophy, because of all of this questioning, actually creates what would be science, or the scientific method. I, as a philosopher, will always point out that the scientists needed us. And then they still need us because sometimes they forget that they too are fallible. And that's what we're here for. Primarily, one of my concerns is artificial intelligence and the ethics of how we're going to teach artificial intelligence. And is the intelligence that of the programmer, or is it developing its own, and dare I say this, sentience, or its ability to conceive of itself as being conscious? And then we're going to get into a string of decisions. Not a big fan of AI. I want my AI tough enough to make playing a video game hard, but I don't want it to decide to lock my doors and decide I'm not of no more value to society. Those days are terrifying. I don't like the idea of a self-supporting colony, let's put it that way. These are the foundations of Western science as well as the foundations of Western philosophy. Science can examine a question through observation and then use those results to create a result, or a trend, or a hypothesis. Please do not use the word theory. The word theory is tossed around so many times that people actually think that it means that it is an actual fact. I'm pretty sure the only thing that falls under that is the theory of gravity. And she is a cruel mistress. She does not change depending. You fall at the same rate of speed, you do the same thing when you fall. Gravity is basically a law, but theory of gravity. Um, we use the word hypothesis. The speculative results, what you've seen, you pair this against, you take your hypothesis. Well, if I've seen this 100 times, it's going to happen 100 more times. We're not going to get into the probability problem as of yet. That comes later. But we look at this through a hypothesis, and it doesn't happen, then what we do is we don't go in there and start altering the data to make our answer work. We should move on to the new answer. This is science. Scientism, which we'll talk about again later a few more times, is when you don't get the results you like, you just start changing some of the data around. And that's just dishonest, and we get into the problem of ethics and morality. These results can also be proven wrong through this observation and experimentation, and it's a concept that is sorely missing in our modern society. Belief in something does not mean a Kierkegaardian, unbending faith to that answer. It's much like in Fear and Trembling, which is a required reading in this course. Fear and Trembling is just placing blind faith in something, knowing it's going to. Again, we have difficulty with these sorts of things that would be not human to not question. And that's where we have to go with this. Philosophy is continually questioning. Science is continually questioning. The two can work and are mutually workable. The same, and I will tell you the same thing. If I teach a history of religion class, you really kind of have to have your religion tempered with your science and with your theology. They are all mutually working together. Now, to state it simply, science deals with the problems that can be addressed experimentally by subsuming the observable events that puzzle us under the dominion of natural laws and how those laws relate causally to those events. Now, above that, we have a picture of a flat Earth. All right. Now, science examples, things that we know by science is, can we know why the sun on certain occasions is blocked out by the moon during certain occasions? Is it because the moon's passed betwixt the earth and the sun? We can prove this through experimentation and observation. Now, the map you see on the left, the old map, the flat earth map, and the map you see and the picture you see on the right with a round earth, you see two very different concepts of the same thing. And for 1,500 years, until Galileo and Copernicus show up, and Johannes Kepler and our scientists of the Enlightenment, post bubonic plague Europe, they knew that the sun was the center of the universe, not the earth as it had been thought prior to this. And not only that, the earth was round. And the reason it was round was because everything else they saw in space was round. And when you have all of this roundness, there's not going to be one little pancake floating through space. So they had to adjust themselves. However, we could not really prove this with an actual visual idea until Yuri Gagarin entered space in the Soviet Union in a space capsule and saw the curvature, who saw the roundness of the Earth. And then of the moonshots of the Apollo project, and the looking back from the moon to the Earth, seeing these very same things. There is a consistency and there is an order to the universe. And the order is, we see roundness. But we knew this only 600 years after we had decided that, hey, the earth was round. We had to take that on some faith, but the math was there. And again, the math tends not to lie unless the mathematician himself is lying. Then we get a problem again of ethics and lying, and ethics of doing the right thing. But this is an old problem. But this is the easiest way I can explain this to you. We thought the world was flat. Now we can literally prove the world is round. Now, the next lecture, which I'm hopefully going to get up in the next day or so, is we're going to look into the world of the pre-Socratics. These are the men before Socrates, and the Socratics in and of themselves, the pre-Socratics in and of themselves, are not so much concerned with how things are run and on a government status or anything, or how we interact with each other. They're so busy trying to figure out what is the nature of the earth, what is the nature of the planet, what is the nature of their environment that they live in, and how do they get to these answers. And then you'll get it. We'll also cover a group called the Sophists, whose only work was to develop arguments that are, in reality, they're very convoluted sometimes, but their job was to keep people in political power. It is the political argument 2,500 years ago, which is the same political arguments that we get today, where somebody is just simply claiming that it is true and they're trying to sway you. That is sophistry. That'll be covered in the next section as well. But until then, these are some ideas for you to start beginning to look at. Make sure you read the chapters. That's important. Please read the chapters. Please look at the questions. If you have anything, look up the word. If the definition doesn't sound right or doesn't seem right, please look it up again. And sometimes you might have to go back to a definition from the 20th century, because as of now, all words are being changed. The meaning is being changed almost overnight, and you can't. That's not good for philosophy, and creating words is not good. The objects, what I'm doing for you is I'm simplifying a very difficult field. That's not difficult because it's a difficult field, but because we as philosophers, in our convoluted way, have made it difficult. I'm going to give you all of this stuff as easy as I can, as lightly as I can, and like I said, you should be able to get a B. You should be able to get a B in this course if you simply do the work, pay attention, write decently, write me a good argument, and we'll go from there. If you have any question, go ahead and contact me through the proper channels, and have a nice day.